I am a child of a Holocaust survivor. Many children of survivors will tell you that their parents refused to tell them about their war experiences. My mother was not one of them. Some of my earliest memories were my mother telling me stories of the trials and tribulations she had to go through to survive. They were both exciting and scary. She had given film testimony to the Spielberg Foundation. In 2015, she wrote the book Where Courage Lives, published by the Azrieli Foundation, and she has an interactive hologram in the Montreal Holocaust Museum. Before the pandemic, she had spoken to countless students in both official languages across Canada. Thanks to Zoom, she's been able to continue educating students and adults in Canada and the United States. Tonight, you're in for a treat. You're going to hear many of the stories that I grew up with. I hope that they captivate you the way they've captivated me my entire life. Any questions, please add them to the chat box, and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. Mom, take it away. It's yours.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Muguette Speiser-Myers. My parents were from Poland. They lived both in Warsaw. They knew each other from the time that they were small, and they got engaged. One day they were walking in the streets of Warsaw, and the three guys ran over to them and opened my father's forehead with a broken bottle. People started screaming. My mother screamed. They called the police, and the police, instead of running after the guys, they took my mother and my father to the police station. There had always been a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. Anyway, they let my mother go, and they kept my mother for the night. They bandaged him, and then they sent him home the next day. Now there is a saying in Polish, "Happy as God in France." And my father told to my mother, "You know what? It's a good idea. Let's go." Now my father had a cousin in Paris who was a tailor. My father had learned. He studied in the Berlin University as an agronomist, but there wasn't too many openings for a Jewish agronomist in France. So he went to work with his cousin, the tailor. Now my father had a unique gift. Whatever his eyes see, his hands could do. So he became a tailor, cut the garment and fitted them and all that. And then he sent for my mother. My mother also worked for the cousin, but what her work was to sew the linings in the coats or in the suits and sew the buttons. She wasn't able to become a tailor because that was noble work, fit only for men, not for women. Okay, so later on, my grandfather, my father's father, came to France also, and he was also a tailor. So my father went to work for him. And my brother was born, and 6 years later I came along, and we lived a nice, quiet life. And then one day my father, who was strong as a rock, fell sick. So he didn't know what to do. He called the doctor, of course. The doctor came, examined my father, and said, "We have to take him to the hospital. He needs oxygen." So they took him to the hospital, and he was supposed to. They told my mother that he has to be fitted into an iron lung. An iron lung is a big tube made out of iron that you put the sick person inside, and then there's oxygen coming through. Today they put two things in your nose and in your nostrils, and it's not the same thing. So unfortunately, either the iron lung was full with another patient, or else it wasn't working properly. So my father lasted 3 days and he passed away. And my mother was left alone with two small children. At that time, foreign women were not allowed to work in France. Men, yes, women, no. And she was allowed to work for my father or for her father-in-law. So my mother, a tiny little lady, not even measuring 5 feet and not even weighing 90 pounds, she went to Paris to the Ministry of Labor. She was introduced to the minister, and she was the first foreign woman in France to obtain a working permit. Well, that was okay. My brother was going to school, But what was it going? What was they doing with me? I was 3.5 years old. My mother went to see the principal in the school, and I was allowed to go and sit with the 5-year-olds. I remember sitting in a small wooden bench, and in the back of the bench there was a bag hanging, and in the bag there were books. That's where I learned how to write, to read. I'm sorry, not to write yet. And so we lived like this. It was nice. It was quiet. And my grandparents, my mother's mother and sister, came to France also. And at that time, we lived in the suburb. But since my grandmother was living in Paris, my mother figured, okay, we're going to go. We live in Paris also. And everything was quiet. I went to school. My brother went to school. My mother worked. And then it was September 1939, the declaration of war. So what happened is that the French government evacuated from Paris everyone who wasn't necessary to the war effort, and also because they thought Paris was going to be bombed. So I was evacuated with my school, and I ended up, I don't remember, 50, 100 kids in a little town southeast of Paris called Sens, and then another one called Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. We slept in gymnastic halls, you know, and we in a straw mattress. The straw mattress it's a big sack, like the kind that they put potatoes in, with straw, and we slept on that with a blanket. We were always hungry. We were told not to touch the bread, the blue bread that was lying around, because it was put there to kill the rats. We lived there unhappy and not knowing where our parents were, and they not knowing where I was. In the meantime, my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, and my brother were evacuated also to a little village called Chanlot. It's 150 people, but 150 kilometers southeast of Paris. So the mayor put them in a beautiful home, them and another family. And the only required the mayor asked of them is that when they have a meal, they should make sure that Monsieur Bézine, he was the old gentleman, Monsieur Bézine, had been a captain in a shipping boat, a ship. So they said also, please make sure that he takes his medication. He was elderly and they didn't remember very well. It was a beautiful home. So my mother said to the other lady, said, look, why don't you clean up a little? Monsieur Bézine never cleaned. He was elderly. He didn't care what his house looked like. So my mother and the other lady, they went in the kitchen. They started cleaning. They opened cupboards and they found a chest, a small chest. So what's in the chest? They opened it, and in the chest there was money and the jewelry and all kind of artifacts that the captain brought back from his voyages. So the other lady said to my mother, "We are rich." Mama said, "What do you mean we? Does it belong to us?" The other lady said, "But you'll never know. He is old." Oh no, that didn't sit well with my mother at all. So she called my grandmother to stand guard in front of the chest while she went to fetch the mayor and the priest. The priest wasn't there, but the mayor came. Now in that small village, 150 people, everybody's their cousins. They're all cousins. They all have the same. The main name was Delagneau, but people get married, so there are other names around. But everybody is a cousin. So since the mayor was a cousin to Monsieur Bézine, he came and he picked the chest for safekeeping, took it home, and he told my mother, "Madame, consider yourself an honorary citizen of Chanlot. And if any time you need us, come back." And that's for another story. Anyway, so excuse me. So finally, after many peregrination, my mother finally found me. My mother had many friends, not only Jews, but non-Jews also. And she had one friend, Madame Javiol, a tall, beautiful lady, a French lady. She wasn't Jewish. but she was tall and big and she spoke loud. So she was able with my mother to try to find out where I was. She went to ask questions and she didn't take no for answers. They finally found me. I was in a sorry state, my head full of lice. I had a big boil on my foot. And anyways, my mother was able to finally, when she found me, she took me home to Chanlot. She was living in Chanlot at the time, and we had to go by train. Now, the train stops at 6 kilometers from Chanlot. So while I was in the train, my mother took me into the bathroom and started combing my hair to try and get as many lice out as she could. And then finally the train stopped, so we walked. The 6 kilometer, half dragging me. And then it was that day, I think, or the next day. It was the day when the doctor came to Chanlot. Chanlot didn't have a doctor, a small village like that, but once a week he came, the doctor. So he took a look at my foot and he told my mother what to do. I was bandaged. I think it lasted a month before it felt better. And we lived there. I went to school. My mother went to work in farms for sewing. The way ladies come nowadays to do cleaning in houses, my mother used to go from farm to farm. And my brother was also going to school for a while, and then he helped another farmer, Monsieur Basile, which is with his farm work and his plowing and all that. And one day must have been Thursday, because Thursday we didn't have school in France. I felt a grinding noise coming down from the top of Chanlot. Chanlot is built on a hill, and on the top is the road to Paris, in the bottom the road to the south. So we heard a grinding noise. So what is it? So of course, curious, I went to the window, put my head through the window, and I saw the first German motorcycles coming down. And I started screaming, "Maman, maman, les Boches," we call them the Boche, "Hitler's cross." My mother came quickly and she closed the windows and she closed the shutter. In France, we have a wooden shutter that you close at night if you want to sleep, so the sun, the moon shouldn't shine into you, to be able to sleep. So, but on those shutters, there are openings. On the top, there are openings like round openings or triangular or square. So each one, my mother and I, both on a chair, because it was too high for us, so we went up on the chair and we were looking out. So after the motorcycle, there was a tank coming down the hill. The tower was open and there was a man all dressed in black standing halfway, his bust was out, and he was holding the gun. He was swiveling it from side to side like that. And they passed. I think the whole day there was so many trucks coming down with German soldiers in them. And they stopped 3 kilometers from Chanlot in a small town called Abrol. And then everything was quiet. It was what they called the phony war. There were soldiers on both sides, but no one fought. So my mother said, "You know what, since the 1940, since everything was quiet, let's go back to Paris. No use staying here." So we went, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, my brother and I, we walked the 6 kilometers and we took the train to go from Brino to go to Paris. So after a while, the train was rolling. After a while, it stopped. It's normal that the train stops, but the train didn't start again. So my mother went down just to find somebody she could ask the reason why. So she found a gentleman in uniform. She figured he must be from the train. So she asked him, she said, "Why did the train stop?" And he said, "Because the French army had blown up the bridge in order to halt the Germans. They didn't halt them for long." So my mother said, "Well, is there another bridge?" The man said, yeah, there's another. We can cross the Seine. There's another bridge. So we started walking. There was a bridge, all right, but it was made of rowboats on which they had sewn planks of wood, and the rowboats just moved. Anyways, we were able to cross with our luggage, and you can see on the in the water there was some suitcases that were floating. Some poor soul had dropped them. Anyway, we took after the other side. We took the train again, and we entered Paris. And then life started again. My mother started to work. My brother and I we went to school, and the Germans, of course, were everywhere, but it was quiet. But about then, another, I don't know if it was a year or what, they started issuing orders. Like Jews were not allowed to go into parks. They weren't allowed to go into movie stations, into movie houses. They weren't allowed to become doctors and all kind of professional professions. They weren't allowed. And also, every Jew has to register at the police station. Now, when you are a foreigner in a land, you obey all the laws. The French, they couldn't care less. French Jews just didn't want to register, but my mother did. So they, of course, gave the address and where we were, and they issued her a yellow piece of cloth. I'll show you. That was shaped like Magen David with the word Jew, Juif on top. And this has to be sewn on our garments on the left-hand side. And it was forbidden to hide it with a purse or with a book. At the beginning, when I first had it, I felt like a leper. How come I'm sighted and nobody else? Well, there wasn't too many Jews where we lived. And after a while, you forget about it. You just wear it on your clothes. You wear it. And I remember an anecdote. I had a little girlfriend, Marguerite Briand, who was my neighbor, and she was not Jewish, and she was making her first communion that particular day. And in France, the first communion are dressed like brides. They have a white dress and a white veil and white gloves and white shoes and all that. And so I was waiting a little further down from the church just to see Marguerite in her fine clothes. So Marguerite's parents were right next to the door of the church. The door opened, and Marguerite, instead of going to her parents, she ran over to me who was standing there with my yellow star. Such a wonderful feeling. She was so good, I never forgot. Anyway, so and then life continues the way we were always scared, of course, but nothing happened. And then it was July the 12th, July 15th, 1942. We were home. Now, the curfew for the Jews at night was 8 o'clock. For the non-Jews, 10 o'clock at night. And we were home. It was been 9 o'clock at the time. And a friend of mine, of my mother, Madame Dumas, who wasn't Jewish, had come to visit us. And then there was a knock at the door, and my aunt came in. Now my aunt, that was my mother had remarried, and this lady was my father. I called him my father's sister, and she was tall, blonde, blue eyes, the German type, perfect German type. Of course, they didn't know she was Jewish. She worked at the Kommandantur, the Germans' headquarters, as a secretary. So as a secretary, she knew all the impending raids, whatever's going to happen. So she came to tell my mother. She said, Bella said, you have to go somewhere, leave the house, because tomorrow they're coming to take the women and children. The men had been taken a year before. And then she ran, she went out because she had other people to warn. So Madame Dumas said to my mother, so Bella, what are you going to do? My mother said, I have nowhere to go. Tomorrow when they come, I'll take Muguette and I'll go with them. And I started screaming. I don't know what. I said, I don't want to go with you. You'll go alone. I'm not going. I don't know why. And then I started rolling myself on the floor and having a fit. So Madame Dumas said to Maman, she said, you know what, Bella, why don't you come and sleep over at my house tonight? Excuse me. So this is what we did. So of course, my mother and Madame Dumas, each with a pair of scissors, started taking off the yellow stars. Madame Dumas put it in her bra. And then, since we didn't have yellow stars yet, we were allowed to go on the street. So we went into the metro, the subway. Now, in France, in the subways and whatever train you were, you face each other. Here, there's one behind the other. In France, the knees touch. So there were Germans a little all over the place. There was no seat for me except next to the door. There was a folding seat. You put it down, you sit down. The minute you get up, the seat folds again. So it's called the strapontin. So I sat in one of those strapontins, and across on the other side, on the other one, there was an old gentleman who was looking at me and looking and looking. What is he one? The old goat? I don't know him. Until finally, I tried not to look at him, but finally he caught my eyes and looked down. And I wanted to see what was so interesting, and I saw, to my horror, that on my beige coat there was the yellow thread delineating the yellow star. So I put my left hand on my right shoulder and I started pulling the threads. The old gentleman smiled and he got up at the next station. I never knew who he was. And so we arrived at Madame Dumas. We spent the night. Curfew was at 8 o'clock in the morning. But my mother wanted to warn her mother and her sister who lived at the other end of Paris. So early in the morning before curfew, she started running in the streets. Now in France, they have in each building there's a big door, big black door, and there is always a corner that you can hide in that door. So whenever my mother heard boots, she at that hour it would only be the Germans or light coming down the streets. She hid in those corners. And finally, she arrived at her mother's house, at her mother's apartment. My grandmother lived on the third floor. And my mother started running up the stairs. On the second floor, she saw her sister coming down between two French policemen. It wasn't the German who did the dirty job, it was the French. So my Auntie Dina said to my mother in Yiddish, you see, they're taking me away. My Auntie Dina didn't speak French. She had just come from Poland not long ago. And besides, she had she had meningitis when she was a child. So she had some difficulty learning a new language, but she was speaking Yiddish. So she told my mother in Yiddish, you see, they're taking me away. My mother didn't answer. My mother figured if she answers, they'll know she is Jewish, they'll take her too. And she has a mother and two children. So she let Mayane died in Auschwitz. And when my mother was elderly already, she had remorse. She said, my sister went to her death thinking I was angry at her. Anyway, so my mother ran up the stairs to her mother's apartment. My grandmother was sitting on a chair and she was crying. It's terrible to see your mother cry. And then she always had a weak heart, and on the spot she had a heart attack. So my mother went to fetch a doctor. There was a doctor not far, Dr. Lavoie-Pierre, who had been good to us. He had, he had cured. He had come to us when we were sick. He knew us. So he said, okay, he's going to go to his house and called an ambulance. Now, everybody knew that the telephone had been discovered, but no one had a telephone. He, on the other hand, being a doctor, he had a telephone. So he called the hospital. The ambulance came and took my mother and my grandmother to the hospital. So they took care of my grandmother. And after a couple of days, like 3 days, they told my mother, now you have to take her home. My mother said, couldn't you keep her another day at least? Look, it's an old woman. And cynically, they told her, "You're lucky we're not giving you up." So my mother, half pulling, half dragging, half carrying her mother, because there was no transportation, took my grandmother home, pulled her up the stairs, put her to bed. My grandmother died the next day. In the meantime, Madame Dumas had taken me to cousins of hers that lived in a little hamlet. You can't even call it a village because there was only 7 farms there. And to cousins of hers called the Savigny. There was a Savigny farm. The family Savigny had 7 children, but only 2 were staying at the farm. The other 5 were working another farm. The Savigny farm wasn't prosperous enough to feed such a big family. And I became part of the family there. I went to school. I stayed there 9 months. I went to school and I lived the way they lived. And everybody had chores in that farm. My chore was to go and mind the cows in the field. Now there was nice, a little field on one side. The middle was the Savigny field. On the right, there was there were wheat growing on in the front. There on the front there was corn, and there was some other kind of cereal. Now the cows, not so dumb. They didn't want to stay in our field. They always strayed somewhere else. Now I had a dog. What this dog is supposed to do is to just bite lightly the cow's legs when they stray to bring them back in that field. And the dog was called Boulot. And when he saw that I was ready to go to the field and get my stick, he started jumping and yapping and everybody said, "Look how happy he is to go to the field with Muguette." He was happy, all right. Once he got to the field, he found himself um, away from the sun, or somewhere in the shade. And he stretched out, and he was snoring. So at the beginning, I started pushing him a little with my foot, and he turned around. He showed me his teeth. I tried with the stick. I thought he was going ready to eat me up. So I let him sleep, and I was running after the cows. Actually, not running, I was walking with them. The cows walked, and then they turned around and they walked back. And I was alone there, far away from everybody. And I started speaking to myself in Yiddish, just not to forget, because it reminded me of my grandmother. My grandmother and my aunt never didn't speak French, so it was only Yiddish with them. And it reminded me of my grandmother. It felt warm. I love the language. Maybe that's the reason I'm still speaking today. And so we lived. I lived like that with them. Very, happy childhood, as happy as could be without my mother, of course. And then my mother came and wanted to take me back to Paris. So there's an anecdote that is not in my book. I forgot to put it in. We were in that small little farm hamlet. There was a train station. So from the farm, we were walking on the road toward the train station with our luggage, my mother and I, and there was a car that stopped in front of us. And 2 fellows speaking perfect French came down, and one of them showed me the back of his vest there, the Gestapo on his label. The Gestapo is the German police. And he asked my mother, "What do you have in those suitcases?" My mother says, "I have my daughter's clothing," and she was in the farm, spending the vacation on the farm. I'm taking her back to Paris. That's what they open up. My clothes were there all right, but there was also a freshly killed chicken and some eggs and a carton, and some milk, and there was all kinds of things, well wrapped, of course, that my mother was taking back to Paris to sell on the black market. And while my mother was starting to bend down, the other guy said, "Show me your identification paper." In France, everybody had to carry identification paper. For the French, it's just two sheets, two that folds like that. For the Jews, it was, It opens like an accordion. Let me show you something. And on the picture, there was the word juif written. This is my copy of my grandmother's passport. Was written juive, juif for girls and women, and juif for men. So this way they, So he said to my mother, "Show me your papers." My mother didn't know what to do first, whether she would open the suitcase or open the purse. And as she started opening her purse, the first one said to her, "You don't look like brigands. You don't like thieves. You can go." And it was a miracle, because I think it's the first time that the Gestapo didn't ask for we want to see our papers. Anyway, we got to the train. We went to Paris, and the next day from Paris we went to the train. We went to Chanlot. Nowadays, to go from Le Bois Mouchet to Chanlot, it takes a couple of hours. But at that time, you had to go back first to Paris, and then take the train to go to Chanlot. And so I went to school. My brother went to the farm. My mother was working. Excuse me. And so Monsieur Curé, the priest, often came to my mother first because he had two coats and cassocks, actually, what he was wearing. He had two of them, and they were both falling apart, but my mother was sewing up one while he was wearing the other. And the priest always liked to speak to my mother was self-taught, but she knew everything. She could discuss on every subject. So he came often to my mother. Now he said to my mother, "You know what? With a name like Speiser, my maiden name Speiser had 8 letters, 2 vowels, and 2 Z's, almost unpronounceable for French." So he says, "No," he said, "we have to change that." So he gave my mother's first name, Bella, became our last name. He gave my mother a new first name, Isabel. My mother was Isabel Bella. My brother's name was Joseph, so there was no problem there. My name is Muguette. So the priest said, well, he said, Muguette is not the name of the saint. And since I don't have any of the girls named Marie in my catechism class, she will become Marie Bella. Now he said, Madame Bella, you have to send your daughter to church and to do like all the other kids. But if she was working around, playing around a Sunday outside when everybody's in church, when the Germans came. So okay, so this is the way I lived. Oh, I learned the catechism very fast. I was a fast learner, and the Catholic religion speaks to a child. A baby born in a manger, and cows and goats and sheep, and especially if you live on a farm. So Monsieur Curé wanted me to be baptized, because he told my mother, if your daughter is not baptized, she won't be able to make a first communion with all the others. And she told my mother that the whole village had prepared my communion clothes, the white dress, the white veil, the white shoes, the white gloves. And my mother didn't know how to refuse, how the whole village were protecting us. So at that time, my stepfather, my father, was a prisoner of the Italians in the south of France. Because when the Germans invaded France, the Italians figured that maybe they can take part also. So they commandeered all the French territory that was along the Mediterranean. So there was two, I think. There were two prisoner camps. One was very strict, and the other one was the Italian had no heart to keep prisoners. The prisoners wanted to go. He just waved goodbye to them. So she found upon my father was in that very strict prisoner camp. So she told the priest, she said, "You know what? For such a momentous occasion, you have to wait until your father was here." And when my father came, it was almost the end of the war. We never spoke about getting baptized again. I was never baptized. And for me, life was quiet. Oh yes, I want to tell you that this is the way we were registered in Charlotte as the Bella family, and also um, my friend, when my friend Jacques told me, Jacques was going to the mayor's house to help his sister, to help his daughter Yvonne with math. She was about as good as math as I was. But so he saw Monsieur le Maire, the mayor, sitting in his chair with a pipe, reading letters that he was throwing in the fire. So Jacques asked, "Monsieur le Maire, why are you why are you putting those letters? Why are you know, burning those letters?" And the mayor said, "Because they're letters of denunciation." Now he never told us who, and we never have found out what. But there must have been some people who were not very happy with us. So we continue living there. One evening, it was already 1944, almost 43 or 44. I used to, my mother, when she worked in the farm, she was paid sometime with money, but most of the time with products from the farm. So milk and a dozen eggs and a rabbit that was freshly killed. So one night I was, evening actually, I was going to one of the farms to pick up the milk. And as I was walking, my Chanlot had two cafes. So in front of the cafe, there was a car, a camouflaged car, which confiscated from the German. The German, usually what they did, their small car, they painted them brown and green in order for, to blend with the leaves in the forest. So there was that car standing in front of a cafe with three guys. Okay, I saw the German, I kept on walking. And coming back from the farm with the milk, I saw my brother among those young men. So whatever my brother was doing, I had to do also. So I went over, and the three young men were wearing a band, an armband that said in French, FFI, Force Française de l'Intérieur de Résistance. And they told us that the American were 10 kilometers from Charlot and they're coming in any minute. I mean, they're coming any time. So that night nobody slept but they didn't come. Next morning we heard again a rumbling coming down from the top of the hill. Everybody started running outside and yelling. And first there was the motorcyclist, and then the jeeps. The jeeps were coming down on two wheels. I've never seen such speed. They were going so fast. And then came the trucks with the soldiers. We wanted to kiss them, wanted to grab them, and they would started throwing us candies and chocolate and chewing gum and but the sardines and spam, the corned beef and soaps and all kinds of things that we hadn't seen in 5 years. And then when the truck stopped, we all tried to climb onto them in order to kiss them. There was also small cars with officers that stopped and wanted to know if we had some fresh fruits that we could give them. Everybody ran home and brought back baskets full of fruits. And there was a gentleman from Chanlot, Monsieur Cormier, who had a French-English dictionary, and he showed something to the gentleman, and in French it was "Enchanté de faire votre connaissance," which in English would have been "Pleased to meet you." I remember they shook hands, and the Americans drove down to Avrol, and they were posted in the same big house where the Germans were before that. And then my mother, my father, my brother, went back to Paris, but they wanted me to stay an extra year because in France, after you finish your schooling in 12th year, you go to the main city and then they give you tests to see if you retain anything from all your years going to school. And I was a fast learner. And anyway, so with the school, I remember one thing when there was um, a spelling test. And the teacher who was teaching, who was reading the text, said in French, le dindon fait la roue. So we knew how to write the roue because she had spelled it for us practically. Anyway, it was, all the, every test, every thing that we learned in the school, in our schools, they give a test for. And then my mother came to recuperate me, and I went back to Paris with her. And my grandmother had left a coat. My mother's mother had a coat, a good winter coat, in woolen coat that she couldn't use. But she wrote to my father's mother. My paternal grandmother had stayed with us in Chanlot, so she survived. So she wrote to her, asking her whether she needed a coat. Well, my grandmother came, took the coat and took it home by metro, of course. And my mother's mother was a short little lady, whether my father's mother was tall. So in order for the coat to suit her, she opened the hems. And in the hems, she found American money, and she found 2 letters from my mother's brothers. My mother knew she had brothers in America, but for us, America was from Tierra del Fuego to the North Pole, the whole continent, everything was America. But now she had the letters. My grandmother, of course, came and brought everything to my mother. So now that my mother had the letters with the addresses in the back, so of course, she started writing to them. So my mother had a brother in Toronto and a brother in Montreal. So they were overjoyed to find out that one family at least escaped the slaughter. And so my mother and brother, we had an aunt in Brantford who had means. So the 3 of them got together to send us tickets, airplane tickets to Montreal. Now, my uncle in Toronto wanted us to go there, but my Montreal said, no, they better come to Montreal. Everybody speak French here. We're not going to be, at least you'll be able to speak with people. Anyways, so we had to take the train in London. So we took a taxi to the train station. We took a train until Calais. Calais, we took the ship until Dover. I was sick like a dog. And from Dover, we took the train to London. So once we arrived in London, they had put us in everything. Everything was arranged from Canada. Excuse me. So once in London, we were put in a hotel, and we were very happy because the hotel had a sign, "Ici on parle français." We went to the office. No one spoke French. The only person that spoke French was another guest in the hotel that came from India. So he was able to translate for us. And then the next morning, we took a taxi to the airport. We got on the plane. We stayed about an hour on the plane, and then the plane took off. But an hour later, the plane came back. They had some technical difficulties with the plane, so we waited another hour till it was repaired, and then the plane took off. Now it took us 24 hours to come from London to Canada, First, the plane stopped in Scotland. Then it stopped in Ireland. Then it stopped in Greenland. It stopped I remember Reykjavik. We stopped in Iceland. And then we crossed the Atlantic. And I was also sick all the 24 hours. But we couldn't land in Montreal because it was foggy or it was snowing. So the plane took us to Boston. In Boston, they put us in a hotel. And then they served us a meal. Now in France, when you're served, so you had your entree and they took the plane away. Then they serve you meat and they take the plane away. They serve you vegetables and a plane. Here, everything was in one plane. One plate. Everything was in one plate. You had a piece of meat, half a potato, so a few green peas, and my mother was pushing me with her elbow. They're crazy, those Americans. It's the middle of winter, it was November, and they put ice in the drinking water. We've never seen anything like that. Anyways, we slept over in Boston. The next day we took the train and we arrived at Windsor Station. And my uncle picked us up with a brother-in-law of his and took us to his house. To his wife, of course, my aunt, and their lovely little girl, Linda. And then we spent the night at my uncle's mother-in-law, lived on Mount Royal Street, and she had a big apartment with several rooms, so we were able to sleep there. Now, my mother wanted me to finish my schooling in French. So she called the French department, and the nun there asked her, are you a Christian? My mother said, no, we're Jewish. If you're Jewish, it's going to have to cost so much per month for tuition. But my mother didn't have the money, so I went to Protestant school. Now in France, I went to commercial high school, and here in Montreal, I went again to commercial high. So, of course, not understanding a word that anybody was saying. But the teacher asked me in French, one of the teachers says, do you know how to type? Of course I know how to type. I learned in France. So she put it in front of a typewriter, gave me a sheet of paper, and started to type. Now, in France, I used to type blind, which is the paper is here, and I type there, I never look at the keyboard. So after a few sentences, teacher stopped me. And she took out the paper and says, you sure you know how to type? Of course I know how to type. And she showed me the paper. It was gibberish. The French keyboard is not the same as the English keyboard. I had to learn how to type all over again. So there I went to school. My mother and my brother worked. And then one day my brother got married. My brother's married. There's no more money coming into the house. He had his own family. So I quit school and I went to work. I went to work in a factory where they were making garments for men. Cutters, big pieces, a big stack of cloth being cut and suited, put it up together and sewn. Now, my job was to be a ticketer because it was a ticket that had to be put on a garment, and had the name of the cloth and the size it was going to be and the color. So that was my job. And there was another young lady that worked there with me doing the same thing. Now we worked from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 5 at night. And now there was a cafeteria downstairs in the basement of the building. So around 10 o'clock, the young lady, Sima, she went asking all those gentlemen, one of the gentlemen there, asking those gentlemen whether they needed something. So the men gave her some money and she went downstairs, bought whatever she needed, they wanted, brought back the money and whatever they had ordered. Then one day I found a chocolate cherry blossom on my desk. I waited until the girl came back and I said, you must have made an error, it's not for me. So when I had any money, my mother used to give me 25 cents for the car fare and 25 cents in case I wasn't feeling well, I should go into a restaurant and order some coffee. So the girl said, yeah, that young man over there, the young cutter, he's the one who's giving it to you. Well, I was well brought up, so I went over with the chocolate, gave it back to him, and I told him that I thank him, but I can't accept things from people that I don't know, and I can't accept things that I can pay for. Okay, so he understood. 2 weeks later, the chocolate blossom was back on my desk. So again, I went to thank him and found out I can't accept. So at that time, he asked me if he could take me home. Okay, well, take me home. Okay. So at night, he took me home, and 2 years later, we were married. End of story. If there's any question, I'm open.
When you said end of story, I was thinking that there would be more. More after.
Well, I got married. My children came. It's. I was safe here.
Muguette, I wanted to hear. Let me add spotlight over here so that people can see me. I'll help moderate the questions over here. I wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. I'm speechless hearing it. I'm going to ask people to add your questions to the thread over here, and I'll pass them on. Muguette, the first question is, how old were you when you came to Montreal?
I was 15.
We have another question. Did your family experience any kindness or help from non-Jews during this time?
All through the whole village, and all through the people that helped us. Madame Dumas, who helped us, and the Madame Javiol, who helped my mother with to find me. There from everybody. There were wonderful people in France.
Beautiful.
People know about the Muguette is done. It isn't. It's Wesley, by the way. Muguette lobbied for many years. Muguette lobbied Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem has never has given individual people the term righteous among the nations, but Muguette lobbied for many years, and in the early in the 2000, or I don't remember exactly what year it was, but she actually got Yad Vashem to declare the whole town of Chanlot as righteous among the nations. There's not another instance where Yad Vashem has declared a whole town righteous among the nations.
What year was that?
Right.
What year was that when Chanlot was recognized? Do you remember?
I think it was 2005, if I remember correctly.
Wow. Anybody else have any questions? I'll remove you. Why did you title your book Where Courage Lives?
Why I wrote the book? Oh no, I wanted to call the book, they called me Marie. But at the Israeli Foundation said this name would be more appropriate.
Okay.
And I agreed.
How many interviews like this have you given, and why is it so important to you to share your story?
Well, I think that a few years already, 5, 6 years that I've been going around. I went with the Israeli Foundation. I went to Calgary, and I went to Winnipeg. I went to Toronto and talking to all those places. And it's important. The youngsters have to be educated. you have to tell them, they have to know that if they see that an injustice is being committed, they have to speak up. They have to employ, they have to protest. Elie Wiesel, the writer, said, the silence profit the tormentor, never the victim.
I'm reading over here. It was courageous of neighbors and friends to protect your family. What was the experience of your family that stayed in Poland during the Holocaust?
Oh, but whoever stayed in Holocaust disappear. Every one of them. I had uncles and aunts and cousins, and none of them.
Were you the only Jewish family in the small town?
Yes. We were the only one. You see, my mother spoke an excellent French. Even better than me, I think. And everybody loved my mother.
What was the name of the book? And please spell the name of the hamlet in France.
The one where I was with the dog? Which hamlet? There's the Chanlot, there's the village, and there's the hamlet, the one where I spent 9 months.
Bernie, it's your question. If you want to add another post over here, we'll get some clarity. In the meantime, we have another question. When did you leave Poland?
When did I leave who?
When did you leave Poland?
I was born in France.
Okay. How old were you when you started to write your book, and how long did it take you to finish?
Oh. Well, it was, you see, I used to on and off, I used to write chapters in the, and on the, in the typewriter, in the computer. I don't remember, I can't tell you how long it took me. Just, and by the time that they collected everything, the chapters weren't following each other the way I wrote it. When I gave it to the Azrieli Foundation, they're the one who put it in sequence. Actually, my mother was urging me to type and to write, and I always held back. Poor mother. I started writing after she passed away.
The question is about the town in France that they were asking about.
The little town where I was. I'll spell it for you, but the pronunciation is not the way it's spelled. It's spelled CHAMPLOST. And it's pronounced Chanlot. CHMP is Champ in France, and Lo, OST is in Old French, it's a battle. So champ de bataille, Chanlot.
We have a question that reads, quite a few Polish Jews immigrated to France after World War I and in the 1920s. Mm-hmm. Why did Jews leave Poland?
Well, because of the anti-Semitism that was in Poland, and also because after you were 18 years old or so, they put you in the army. At the time, it was a Russian army. Nobody wanted to know. No Jew wanted to go into the army. Well, most of the men came. That's how my two uncles came they came first to New York and then to Canada to escape the draft.
The follow-up question was, do you keep in touch with anyone from Chamblast?
I'm sorry?
Do you keep in touch with anyone?
Oh, of course. Of course, all the girls I went to school with that are still around. When I first came back to Chanlot 23 years after I left, I think after I came to Canada, the elderly, the old people were gone, but still my teacher was still around, so I was able to see her. And all the girls, as I said, they're still around at the time, the girls and the guys, everybody I went to school with. I still keep in touch now. I call them I just call them for Christmas, for New Year's, for Easter.
What question have you ever been asked that made you think and reflect the most before answering it? And you can't say this question.
Just what I was asked, what I've been asked by kids, if I ever met Hitler.
Did you ever get to meet the priest again after you left to Canada?
No, unfortunately, no.
So, since it's at the hour mark, we have one post. It's an honor to hear your story once more time. And I'm sure that as we start wrapping up, we're going to start seeing more and more of those types of appreciatory and thank you notes that are going to be coming through. But Muguette, you started off part of the early the elements of your story by saying that in the old town, everybody was a cousin and everybody knew each other. Mm-hmm. And if you look to the impact that your family has had on the Adath community, specifically, just looking to how everybody is a family and everyone's a friend, and your children, your in-laws, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, the legacy speaks for itself, especially here at the Adath. So on behalf of the congregation, on behalf of Rabbi Whitman, who asked me to pass on this message, who would normally be serving this role if he wouldn't be in another city, we wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. And on a personal note, what I can share is I was actually talking to somebody who interviewed you, a young woman who's 13 years old, whose name was Elaine Goldstein, who interviewed you for her podcast a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And the exact words that she had to me were, I can't speak about how wonderful and warmth and genuine and with it you are, and how caring you were that you took the time to answer each one of her questions. And I can see over here that there are so many people that are appreciative and thankful for you to be sharing your remarkable story. And the only question that keeps coming through over here is, where can we get your book? So the answer is reach out to the office. We will make arrangements to put you in touch.
Okay. I know it's also available on Amazon, I was told.
Beautiful.
Right. You're very, very welcome.
Thank you, everybody, again. And thank you, Arlene and Wesley, for introducing, and for everybody for participating. And we wish you all a good night and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stu.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mom.